Demon's Souls, a game that started a franchise that was loved and adored by many over the past decade. Without it, we wouldn't have the iconic Dark Souls trilogy that taught us to motivate ourselves through failure. We wouldn't have the masterfully crafted Bloodborne that taught us to not be afraid to fight or hide behind a shield. And we wouldn't have the visually stunning Sekiro that showed us the strength that we have in ourselves, even when we are alone. All of these games stem from one original creation, which is Demon's Souls, a game that many had heard about, but few had the privilege to experience firsthand. And through the strenuous effort of Bluepoint Games, has now been visually remade from the ground up for the PlayStation 5. And although it is primarily a visual remake, Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 5 still manages to give off the impression of an entirely new experience, even for people that have played the original title religiously. But with the introduction out of the way, now begins the long journey for the Demon's Souls review. The once great and prosperous land of Boletaria has become engulfed by a colorless fog through the actions of the great King Allant, now corrupted by the power of accumulating souls, has reawakened the old one and brought along the gluttonous and insatiable wrath of the demon race. All hope seemed lost as the demons loomed over the defenseless human race and began devouring souls, reinvigorating their existence. But through the actions of the noble Valorfax of the Twin Fangs, was able to send out one final plea for assistance. And now, it is up to one brave soul to traverse the colorless fog and bring an end to this horrific madness. Or will this hero be seduced by the nightmarish beauty and power of the demon's souls? When it comes to a Souls game, the story is only as good as the player's willingness to explore their surroundings. The brilliant thing about this game is that you can go through the whole journey without any knowledge of the horrors that have plagued Boletaria and the other locations. But if you become captivated by the atmosphere and the overall beauty of exploring these different lands, you are introduced to a cast of non-playable characters that slowly deepen the overall lore for this game. Some of my favorite NPCs that I met along this journey were Ostrava of Boletaria, a once proud and noble prince, now forced to walk along the demon-infested ruins of a place he once called home. His goal is to see the land he loved be restored to its former glory, and to seek an audience with his father, King Allant, and try to make things right for his people. Then, there's the genius Master Sage Frake, a prodigy in the magical arts, locked and withering away in the prisons of hope, and upon his rescue, requests the protagonist to accumulate demon souls so that he may study the enigma of the demon soul and create new and more powerful magical spells that the protagonist may use in his journey. If you are familiar with the other Souls titles, then you already know about the silver-tongued thief, Patches, the hyena, that somehow manages to lull weary travelers with the promise of fortune, only to recover their corpses for his own personal gain. And then my personal number one favorite character, Yurt, the Silent Chief, who is safely locked away in the sky cages of Upper Latria, only to be foolishly saved by the protagonist. And upon his arrival in the Nexus, which is the central hub for the game, a series of unfortunate events unfold, ultimately leading to a final confrontation between the protagonist and the emotionless Yurt, the Silent Chief. Now, these are only a few characters that you meet along the way, alongside a much larger cast of colorful individuals that somehow, through their own personal stories and quest lines, shine a light in this rather unexplainable, colorless fog of death and destruction. And the magnificent thing about some of these characters is that you have no way of truly knowing who is looking out for your best interests and who is more interested in the downfall of Boletaria. Because of that, it creates an amazing level of storytelling that makes the player feel a sense of uneasiness and confusion when slowly traveling through the game. When it comes to the gameplay, This is admittedly the easiest of all the Souls titles, but that doesn't make Demon's Souls any less entertaining and exciting. Being able to come back and revisit some of these iconic boss fights. One moment, you're trying to escape the fiery clutches of the armored spider, a creature lurking in the Stonefang tunnels. The next, you're up against the Storm King of the Sky, panicking and trying to escape his demonic wrath, all the while trying to sway and dodge projectiles from his lesser subjects. Then, you have this poetically crafted one-on-one confrontation against the Penetrator, where the intensity of the fight drowns out the sounds of the music, and the only melody you hear ringing in your ears are the impacts of your blades colliding against one another. All of these boss fights are so beautifully recreated, and somehow, even though some boss fights are significantly easier than others, each fight manages to become unforgettable through this remake. My absolute favorite battle was the one against the Great King Allant himself, and what made this fight beautiful was just the level of intimacy and tension between the two characters. The Great King going up against this lesser soul that had no business being in Boletaria. The sounds of the king's infamous sword, the Soulbrand, echoing across this grand hall, now just a place of ruin, and the final memorial of the once great land of Boletaria. And that is something that Demon's Souls and the other Souls titles do exceptionally well. The graceful dance between life and death is a constant throughout this game, outside of just the boss fights, but even when exploring the different Arkstones. That exciting feeling, knowing that at any moment could be your last. One small misstep, and it is the end of your journey. Whether it's exploring the eerie prisons of hope, or slowly crawling through the broken bridges in the Valley of Defilement, every moment in this game gives off this sense of uneasiness, and initially is very uncomfortable. But the more time you invest, explore, fight, you strangely end up developing this love and comfort when progressing through the game. And when it comes to the philosophy of the gameplay, I love how this game conditions your brain into understanding that failure is never the end. No matter how many times you may fall in this game, you can still get back up and eventually succeed, provided you have the will to keep playing. This is one of the few games where not only did my character become stronger through leveling up, stats, etc., but I actively felt as though myself as the player grew alongside my protagonist. With every death in the game, I felt as though my knowledge grew and my abilities became more refined, and eventually, I ended up beating the game 5 times, and I'm now currently working on my 6th playthrough. Some side notes. One thing about this game that did help with the immersion was the implementation of the DualSense controller. Admittedly, when I'm completely engaged, I didn't notice it, but when it was brought to my attention that the controller plays an active role in creating a sense of physical engagement, I started noticing that certain actions that my character would do in the game would be reflected on the controller, whether it was the slight pulling and tension of a bowstring, igniting a fire on my blade, or simply rolling. The PS5 controller would mimic some of those feelings or sounds with the built-in speaker, the vibrations on the sides of the controller, and the stiffening of the triggers. And I thought that was very interesting and not something I experience regularly in my games. Another side note, and unfortunately this is more of a negative about the game, although this has been remade visually, the actual gameplay is more or less the same, and some of the bugs that you would see in the original PS3 version are still in this game as well. One example was the Man-Eater boss fight. If you position yourself appropriately at the center of the arena, there is this strange glitch that allows the Man-Eaters to lose attention towards you, and then they will go in opposite directions and stay still, which then allows you to slowly whittle away at their health without any difficulty. Another issue is the lack of deleting save files. I'm someone that enjoys making multiple characters, and some creations I don't have a use for. But unfortunately, from what I saw, there is no way to delete characters that you no longer play with, which isn't a deal breaker, but it is odd that such a simple mechanic isn't available. One last side note, there is this concept in the game known as world tendency and character tendency. Depending on how you play, will determine whether or not enemies in certain areas will be stronger or weaker, and whether or not there will be black phantoms in certain areas that will try to invade and kill you. Personally, I thought this was a silly concept, and also kind of annoying, especially on my first New Game Plus playthrough, where everything was significantly stronger because I didn't pay attention to my world tendency. So, instead of just your standard numerical rating system, we're going to be using what we call a quote system. Certain words that we would use to associate with this game, and then from there, we elaborate on those words. The first word I would use to describe this game is exhilarating. From the exact moment you draw your sword and kill your first enemy, to every major boss fight, this game, as well as other Souls games, has you sitting on the edge of your seat, eagerly awaiting the next battle. Eventually, just craving that adrenaline rush and looking forward to the next iconic fight the game has to offer. The next word I would use to describe this game is beautiful. With the way this remake is designed, everything is awe-inspiring. The attention to detail, the way certain creatures move, the animations of your character when they swing their sword, roll around, use magic. The game, in a visual sense, is so carefully and meticulously redesigned to the point where it almost becomes emotional, being able to revisit the beginning of such a glorious franchise. And the last word I would use to describe this game is replayable. This is one of the few franchises and games where the exact moment I finished my first playthrough, I immediately wanted to go back and play it all over again. Through this game's struggles and hardships, at the end of the road, somehow, Demon's Souls makes you appreciate how much you achieved as the player. And without any incentive or motivation, you naturally just want to experience it all over again, just to see how much you truly learned, and if there is anything else that can be discovered in the game. With all of that being said, I'm not here to tell you whether or not you should or shouldn't play this game. But I will say this. If you are someone that currently owns a PlayStation 5, I truly believe that you may be doing yourself a disservice not at least trying the game. And who knows, maybe Demon's Souls is the next masterpiece that you've been looking for to add to your collection. With that being said, I hope you have a fantastic day, and even if you don't, I hope you have an even better tomorrow. We'll hopefully see you guys next time. Goodbye, everyone.